Hey everyone. Tonight, we're peeling back the gilded layers of history to step into something raw, unforgiving, and yet uncannily familiar. We're entering a world defined not by marble statues, but by overflowing chamber pots. Not by grand triumphs, but by crowded, crumbling tenements and the relentless, grinding toil of daily life. This is not the Rome of epic films or the polished halls of a museum. Forget the emperors draped in purple. Forget the gleaming armor of gladiators. Tonight, we journey into the heart of what was real for the vast majority. The daily struggle for survival in a city brutally and magnificently built on the backs of the millions history chose to forget. So, before we descend into the true underbelly of the Roman Empire, I invite you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you're ready for this kind of immersive, slow burn, and gritty storytelling. I'd also love to see where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far our little sleep experiments can travel. Alright, dim the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for some white noise, or pull the covers up to your chin. Get settled, get comfortable, because you are about to awaken in ancient Rome, and the odds are not in your favor. In fact, you'll be lucky to make it to nightfall. Congratulations! You've just blinked your eyes open in ancient Rome. Not in a sprawling palace, and certainly not in a serene marble villa flanked by fountains, where servants in crisp togas offer you peeled grapes. No, your consciousness has crash-landed right where most of the city's million souls resided. You've woken up in a place where plumbing is a distant theory, where the walls feel one hearty sneeze away from total collapse, and where your upstairs neighbor is, at this very moment, stomping around with the force of a gladiator on leg day. You are in an insula, the Roman blueprint for the apartment building. The name itself, literally meaning island in Latin, should be your first clue that you are utterly, hopelessly stranded. You're on the 4th floor if you can call yourself lucky. Any higher, and you'd essentially be nesting in the flammable rafters of a citywide fire hazard. These buildings are a haphazard cocktail of cheap brick, timber, and wishful thinking, swaying in the wind and leaning on each other like drunken old friends. Their structural integrity is, on a good day, comparable to that of a stale loaf of bread. And speaking of bread, don't you dare think about toasting it. Open flames are strictly forbidden in your dwelling, because one minor cooking mishap could send the entire block erupting into a roaring bonfire, a grim spectacle for the gods. Your room, if you can call it that, is roughly the size of a modern walk-in closet. Inside, a cot, a term used with extreme generosity, is fashioned from frayed rope and packed straw. It's covered by a threadbare blanket that carries the faint, sour scent of every soul who has ever slept, sweated, and suffered on it before you. The walls are perpetually damp, adorned with stains of mysterious origin, and so close together that if you lie on your side and stretch, your fingers and toes can brush against both of them simultaneously. Windows, a laughable luxury. Your only light seeps in from the crack beneath the flimsy door and from a jagged hole in the ceiling, a lasting memento from a tenant 3 generations ago who got a bit too enthusiastic with a broom handle. There is no such thing as privacy here. You share this cramped space with 2 other souls. One of them is currently hacking and coughing with such a theatrical, rattling flair that you briefly entertain the notion you've woken up inside a poorly written tragedy. Spoiler alert, it's not for dramatic effect. It's probably tuberculosis. Outside your door, the morning doesn't arrive with the gentle chirping of birds. It explodes with the thunderous rumble of wooden carts on cobblestone and the operatic yelling of vendors hawking their wares. Olives, pungent fish, and something unidentifiable that might have been bread in a former life. A donkey brays with the desperation of a dying man. Children are crying as if they, too, are dying. And from 2 floors below, a heated argument about taxes is already in full swing. You try to stretch. Terrible idea. Your spine cracks with the dry, brittle sound of a papyrus scroll unfurling in a drought. You instantly regret the attempt to act like a person whose back hasn't been permanently contorted into a question mark by years of punishing labor and a diet consisting primarily of beans and profound regret. You are perhaps 27 years old, which in this neighborhood makes you a venerable elder. Most people here don't see 40. They succumb to a deadly trifecta of injury, infection, or simply inhaling too much of whatever noxious gas seeps up from the latrine pits every summer. Barefoot, you shuffle off the cot. Of course, you're barefoot. Shoes are a currency, and if you possessed such wealth, you wouldn't be calling this place home. The floor is a tapestry of sensations. Cold, damp, and vaguely sticky. Is it spilled wine from last night? Is it urine? A splash of olive oil? In all likelihood, it's an unholy trinity of all 3. You carefully sidestep the sleeping form of your neighbor, trying not to nudge the communal chamber pot with your toe. It's full. It is, without exception, always full. Time to relieve yourself. Wonderful. You have a couple of options. Option 1, use the aforementioned overflowing chamber pot. Its contents will soon be disposed of by, drumroll, please, heaving it straight out the window. There's a loose protocol to this. You're supposed to shout a warning, "Cave," which is Latin for watch out, before you launch the day's waste onto the unsuspecting street below. Let's be brutally honest. Nobody ever does. The streets of your neighborhood reek of a potent perfume of stale urine, feces, rotting food, and the ghosts of dead dreams. The gutters are open trenches where waste flows with a life of its own. And on a rainy day, it all comes washing back to greet you at your own front door. Hygiene, you ask? That's a cute, modern concept. There are no showers, no bars of soap, no fragrant toothpaste. If you're feeling particularly fancy, you might splash your face with water from the public fountain. Provided you don't mind sharing the experience with a dozen other people and a stray dog diligently licking a festering wound. You might scrape your teeth with a frayed twig. If you're feeling truly bourgeois, you'll rub some ash on them for good measure. Your breath, consequently, smells like a fermented blend of old lentils and pure existential dread. Still, you pull on your tunic. Your one tunic. It's woven from rough, itchy wool or linen, stained in ways you gave up trying to identify long ago. It smells of mildew and unwashed humanity. Deodorant doesn't exist. Underwear is a fantasy. You cinch it at the waist with a length of rope and pray to the gods that it holds for the day. If it doesn't, well, congratulations. You've just pioneered the concept of public indecency. Not that anyone would even notice. In the teeming streets of Rome, modesty is a luxury mostly reserved for the marble statues and the upper-class poets. Stepping outside your building is like diving headfirst into a war zone of the senses. The street is already a chaotic, swarming river of humanity. Vendors scream their prices, beggars plead with practiced desperation, and a pair of oxen hauling a cart defecates mid-step without breaking stride. Thick, buzzing clouds of flies swarm over the fish stalls. Somewhere nearby, a rooster is either being brutally murdered or is simply expressing its feelings about the dawn. Someone is cooking something that smells unmistakably of disappointment. Your neighbor's child, barefoot and smeared with a substance that could be jam, could be blood, or could be both, sprints past you in a blur of filth and youthful energy. You navigate this human obstacle course, making your way toward the communal bakery, one of the few shared luxuries on your block. Here, you hand over your government-issued grain ration, a small, cloth-wrapped lump of barley flour. The baker, a man whose arms are permanently dusted in flour and soot, takes it without a word and adds it to the collective pile. Hours from now, you'll return to claim your portion. A small, hard, blackened loaf of bread. It's barely edible, tasting mostly of the ash and coals from the public oven. But hey, it's warm and it's yours. Assuming, of course, that no one steals it from you first. Breakfast. Yes, let's call it that for old time's sake. On a good day, you might get a bit of pulse, a thick, heavy gruel made from boiled grains. It's the fuel of the Roman poor, the culinary baseline of the empire. Just grain and water. Maybe some chickpeas are thrown in, maybe not. If the gods are smiling upon you today, it's garnished with a scant drizzle of olive oil. If it's a bad day, that drizzle is actually rat urine, and you just haven't realized it yet. Meat? That's a punchline to a joke you're not in on. That's for the rich. Milk spoils in an instant. Cheese? Perhaps. Eggs? Only if you're quick enough to snatch them from the scrawny chicken that nests under the stairs. Most of your protein will come from beans, lentils, and wishful thinking. If you crave fruit, it had better be in season and miraculously unspoiled. Otherwise, you're gnawing on the husk of an overripe fig and trying to convince yourself it's a plum. You might stop by the latrina, a public latrine, to take care of more serious business, especially if you enjoy the camaraderie of a dozen other men doing the exact same thing simultaneously. Picture a long marble bench with a series of holes carved into it. No dividers, no doors, and for toilet paper, a shared sponge on a stick, soaking in a bucket of vinegar water. That is the Roman xylospongium. You rinse it, you wipe, you place it back in the bucket for the next person, and you try very, very hard not to make eye contact with anyone. And after all of that, it's barely mid-morning. The real work of the day hasn't even begun. But before you head off to your physically and emotionally crushing job, you pause for just a second. You look around. The street is a living, breathing creature. It's smelly, chaotic, and dangerous, but it is undeniably alive. Children are screaming and chasing each other through the alleys. A street performer is juggling knives with a level of skill that is genuinely concerning. A merchant is shouting about the miraculous healing properties of his fermented fish sauce. And the city breathes, chokes, coughs, and burps in one endless, overwhelming symphony of humanity. Your landlord? You've never seen him. Building repairs? Don't hold your breath. If your building collapses, it isn't a tragedy. It's just a Tuesday. Fires are common. Floods are common. Sudden, unexplained death is practically a local pastime. You are a single, replaceable cog in a massive, indifferent machine. You're not even a full citizen. You're just a warm body, a name on a census scroll. Your value is measured by how quietly you are willing to suffer. And you will suffer, because this is ancient Rome. Not the Rome of gleaming marble forums and golden laurel wreaths. Not the Rome of historians and Hollywood. This is the Rome of soot-stained slums and overflowing chamber pots, of grit and groaning, beautiful, terrible humanity. You are not Cicero. You are not Caesar. You aren't even in the same universe. You are a nobody on the 4th floor of a tinderbox, praying the 3rd floor doesn't catch fire again. And it's only the beginning of your day. Having survived your first Roman night without being robbed in your sleep, asphyxiated by smoke, or crushed by a neighbor's drunken body rolling onto your mat, you've earned the privilege of waking up to the sweet, piercing symphony of the city. It's never a gentle alarm. It's the sound of your neighbor berating his wife, The vendor below your window screaming about the freshness of his fish, or the sharp crack of a chamber pot hitting the cobblestones after someone on a higher floor decided to share last night's wine and bodily fluids with the world. Your eyes crack open to a ceiling so low you could probably punch it just by sitting up. The air, thick with the scent of feet, garlic, and perpetual mildew, makes you wonder for a fleeting moment if you've died and woken up in Hades. But no, a quick assessment confirms you are, unfortunately, still alive. Your home, a generous term for this particular insula, is a Roman apartment building constructed from wood, wishful thinking, and highly flammable lies. You're on the third floor, which is marginally less lethal than the fifth. The higher you live, the cheaper the rent, and the better your odds of dying when the whole precarious structure inevitably gives way. Down below, the wealthy enjoy sturdy homes and the mythical luxury of indoor plumbing. Up here, you enjoy the company of rats, persistent water leaks, and the subtle, incessant creaking that serves as a constant reminder that this building is held together by little more than hope and mold. You swing your legs over the side of your straw mat and immediately regret it. The floor is damp. It's a permanent state of being. Whether it's from water, wine, or blood, you'll never know. The answer doesn't change the fact that your only pair of sandals was stolen last week, and you've been navigating this world barefoot ever since. You gingerly avoid the mysterious sticky patch in the corner and stand, stretching your aching back with the gracelessness of a cat being kicked down a flight of stairs. Time to wash up. You think, a notion so quaint it's almost funny. There is no basin, no sink, no soap. You wipe your face with a damp cloth that may or may not have once been used to clean your landlord's armpits. Your morning skincare routine involves rubbing oil on your skin and then scraping it off with a curved blade called a strigil. It sounds elegant until you realize it's just ancient Roman exfoliation by way of pain. You're essentially buttering yourself like a piece of toast, then peeling off the top layer. If you're lucky enough to live near a bathhouse and have a few coins to spare, maybe you can achieve a state of actual cleanliness later. But for now, hygiene is a concept, not a practice. You settle for smearing your face with whatever water you can find in a communal jar and call yourself refreshed. And now breakfast. Brace yourself. The Roman equivalent of a power breakfast is, well, basically nothing. The morning meal is called ientaculum, which might as well be Latin for don't get your hopes up. It usually consists of yesterday's bread, now as hard as a chunk of marble, which was lovingly stored overnight in a clay pot frequented by mice. You soften it by dipping it into watered-down wine, a beverage that tastes like vinegar with trust issues. Feeling fancy today? Maybe you get a few olives or a smear of garum, the infamous Roman fermented fish sauce that smells like low tide and abject failure. It's Rome's favorite condiment, an all-purpose flavor enhancer for everything from meat and vegetables to moments of crushing despair. It's the ketchup of the ancient world, if ketchup were made from the rotting entrails of mackerel. There is no coffee. There are no eggs. There is no fruit smoothie with collagen powder. Your breakfast has a single solemn purpose: to prevent your immediate death from starvation. It succeeds, barely. You chew your slice of disappointment in silence, while your neighbors scream at each other about something. It's probably taxes or the grain rations. Or maybe it's about that man on the second floor who keeps sacrificing pigeons in the hallway. You don't ask. The first rule of tenement life in Rome is simple. The less you know, the longer you might live. Once you've gnawed your way through your meal of sadness, it's time to get dressed for the day. Don't get excited. You own 2 garments: a tunic made from the roughest wool imaginable, and a threadbare cloak that's more whole than fabric. The tunic itches constantly. The cloak stinks. Both have been patched and repaired so many times they're basically held together by prayers and the distant memory of better fabric. You tie a belt around your waist to keep the whole ensemble vaguely attached to your body and hope for the best. The rich wear togas. You do not. Togas are for citizens, for men of status. You, on the other hand, are a pleb, a non-citizen immigrant, a nobody. Wearing a toga would be like impersonating someone with dignity, an offense for which you would surely be arrested. As you step outside, you're hit with the full sensory assault that is a Roman street at dawn. The noise is a physical force. Vendors hawking their wares, street musicians playing instruments no one asked for, and somewhere, someone is always, inexplicably, screaming about cucumbers. It's chaos, but it's an organized, smelly chaos. The streets are paved with large stones, slick with a cocktail of everything you can imagine. Animal waste, human waste, and mystery slop that no one wants to identify. Rome has sewers, yes, but the Grand Cloaca Maxima serves the rich neighborhoods. Your street is self-cleaning, which means the rain occasionally washes the filth into someone else's problem. It's a system that works, sort of. You walk carefully, avoiding the puddles and the people. A cart, pulled by a pair of donkeys, barrels past you, driven by a man who seems genuinely offended by the existence of pedestrians. There are no sidewalks, no traffic laws. There is only raw instinct, desperate prayer, and the faint hope that the gods are paying attention today. You pass by temples where people line up to offer sacrifices. Flowers, coins, small animals. You have nothing to give, so you offer Jupiter's statue an awkward nod and keep moving. He probably wasn't listening anyway. You are headed to find work. Congratulations. That means you didn't starve to death yesterday. Work in ancient Rome is not fulfilling. It is not purpose-driven. It is survival in a tunic. You might head to the forum, not to debate philosophy, but to stand in a crowd of other desperate men, hoping someone with a construction project needs expendable muscle for the day. You're competing with hundreds of others. Some are stronger. Some own their own tools. You have only your aching back. Eventually, you're hired. Your job for the day, hauling bricks across a sprawling construction site. Rome is in a perpetual state of being built. New roads, new aqueducts, new arches, new homes for the rich. Augustus famously found a city of brick and left it a city of marble. You are the one who will drag that marble, sweating and silent. The work is merciless. There are no labor laws, no unions, no scheduled breaks. No helmets, and absolutely no complaints. If you fall from a scaffold, you won't be given medical aid. You'll be shoved to the side so the next man can take your place. The overseer watches, a heavy stick in his hand. He doesn't carry it for decoration. Midday approaches, and the sun is a brutal, oppressive force. Rome's climate is hot, sticky, and utterly unconcerned with your suffering. Your tunic is glued to your skin. If you have sandals, they slap against the hot stones with every exhausted step. If you don't, the soles of your feet are slowly becoming one with the pavement. Lunch is called prandium, and if you're lucky, it consists of more bread, maybe a small wedge of hard cheese, or a few dried figs if your employer had a good night gambling. You eat sitting on a dusty step, watching richer Romans being carried past in curtain litters, like mobile royalty. You chew your gritty bread, trying not to think about how much sand and rodent hair you're probably consuming. The day wears on. The smells of the city intensify. A thick stew of sweat, garbage, and garum. You pass a bakery and inhale deeply, the scent of freshly baked bread momentarily tricking your brain into thinking that life might just be worth living. Then you remember, bread is taxed, your landlord raised the rent again, your water jar cracked last night, and your cousin is still sick with whatever plague is currently in fashion. You keep walking, you keep working, you keep surviving, because in ancient Rome, for people like you, that is the entire point. As the midday sun climbs to its merciless peak, your tasks are only half finished. There is still more hauling, more mixing, more enduring. Your stomach growls, a hollow echo of the inadequate meal you consumed. Your fingers cramp around the rough edges of brick and stone, and your feet blister inside sandals that are barely holding themselves together. And no one is coming to relieve you. Not today, not tomorrow. Welcome to the Roman workday. But your story, this grueling chapter of your existence, is not unique. It is one of millions, a single thread in a vast, coarse tapestry of labor. Rome is not a place of idleness for the lower classes. The empire may be vast, but from where you stand, the city feels like a great funnel where the sweat and blood of thousands is gathered, filtered upward, and enjoyed by the very few. Let's start with the plebeians, the class you likely belong to. Not the absolute poorest of the poor, but still a universe away from comfort. Most plebeians in the city are tradesmen, manual laborers, builders, bakers, water carriers, cobblers, or street vendors. If you possess a specific skill, you might be a stone cutter, or perhaps you've secured a coveted spot in one of the Roman guilds, the collegia. But for most, including you, you are simply expendable muscle. You are hired for the day, and if you're lucky, paid by the hour. You don't have a fixed schedule or a career path. You have a need, a relentless, gnawing need. You work because the alternative is not eating. If your daily toil isn't on a construction site, perhaps you found work in the tanneries. The stench hits you from a block away, a physical assault on the senses. You spend your day knee-deep in vats filled with a fermenting slurry of animal skins, urine, and dung, all baking under the hot sun. You stir the vile mixture with your bare hands. Gloves are a fantasy yet to be conceived. The smell clings to your skin and clothes, following you home, becoming so ingrained in your life that you eventually stop noticing it. Still, you persist. You endure. Because if you don't earn those few copper coins today, there will be no food tomorrow. The rent for your crumbling, rat-infested fire trap of an apartment is due every few days. Miss a single payment and you're out on the street. No notice, no mercy. The landlord already has a line of men waiting to take your place. But perhaps your fate is even harsher. Perhaps you are not a plebeian. Perhaps you are a slave. Now, life is harder still, because you are denied even the grim satisfaction of a wage. Your body is not your own. It is a tool. Your labor belongs to someone else. If you are a household slave, owned by a moderately wealthy Roman citizen, your workday begins long before sunrise. You are fetching water, scrubbing floors, preparing elaborate meals you will never be permitted to taste. Maybe you were educated in your former life, so you are assigned to tutor the children or read poetry aloud to your master. It sounds like a better life. It isn't. One simple mistake, one misplaced word, and you are beaten. If your master's wife finds you displeasing for any reason, you are sold off like a piece of furniture. There are no protections, no courts to hear your pleas. You are property no different from the stove or the sandals. Or worse, you could be a field slave shipped out of the city to toil on the vast agricultural estates, the latifundia that feed Rome's insatiable stomach. Here, there is no roof over your head, no day off. You wake with the sun and you bend your back until it sets, planting, plowing, harvesting, sweating. It doesn't matter how hot the sun, how cold the wind, how sick you feel. You work. The overseer doesn't care if you collapse from exhaustion. For those who slow down, there are chains. For those who try to run, there are whips. And for those who dare to rebel, there is crucifixion. A slow, agonizing public death along the main roads, a warning for all others to see. And what of the women? If you are a woman, whether slave or free, your labor is just as constant, though often quieter and confined to the shadows. You are not on the scaffolds or in the forum, but your work bleeds you just as much. You spend your day grinding grain with a heavy stone hand mill, your arms and back screaming as you turn the corn hour after grueling hour. You bake the bread, you wash the clothes in the filthy river, you haul the water, you tend the fires, you clean, you mend, you weave. If you are poor, you might also sell small goods on the street or offer your services as a wet nurse or a midwife. And in the most desperate of cases, you might be forced to sell the one thing you have left, yourself. Prostitution is legal in Rome, and it is taxed. It is not a profession of glamour. It is a profession of pure survival. In this world, life is fragile, and death is a constant, familiar neighbor. There are no toilets in your insula, no kitchens. Fires are frequent and ferocious. The ladders of the fire brigade, the vigiles, can't reach the upper floors where you live. Your children are not safe, not from hunger, not from illness, and not from the very building you live in. Life expectancy hovers between 25 and 30 years. Infant mortality is terrifyingly high. Nearly 1 in 3 babies won't survive their first year. Your child's best chance is to make it to the age of 5. After that, their survival is still just a coin toss. And yet, as you sweat and bleed and endure, Rome moves on. The senators debate in the Curia. The aristocrats recline on shaded terraces, sipping wine cooled with snow from the mountains. Their banquets are legendary, filled with exotic delicacies like stuffed dormice and honey-glazed songbirds. Below them, unseen and unheard, you are the engine of it all. Your work is invisible, but it is indispensable. The aqueducts flow with clean water. The grain ships from Egypt arrive on time. The streets are swept clean of the worst filth. All because of people like you. The empire was not built by emperors. It was built on the broken backs of millions of men, women, and children who worked until they broke and were then replaced. Sometimes the crushing monotony of your life is broken, not by a festival or a feast you're invited to, but by something worse. A fire that consumes your entire block. A building collapse that buries your neighbors in rubble. Or a food riot. When the grain ships are late or the bread is moldy, hunger turns to rage. You might find yourself in a crowd shouting in the forum, demanding your portion, only to be met by the shields and batons of the city guard. You are dispersed, not heard. And then there is the ever-present threat of disease. Filth lines the alleys. The latrines overflow. The Tiber, for many a source of drinking water, is also a sewer. You wash clothes in it. You bathe in it. You drink from it. Parasites and bacteria thrive. You know the signs all too well. A sudden fever, the chills, the sound of a child coughing through the night. There are no doctors or pharmacies for your kind. There is only rest, prayer, and hope. And hope, you've learned, rarely comes. But still, you work. Because if you stop, even for a single day, the city forgets you. The empire forgets you. And hunger, your most faithful companion, remembers you very, very quickly. You're parched. You have spent the entire day toiling under the heat, enveloped in a cloud of dust, noise, and the aggressive scent of humanity in full ferment. You crave water, cold, clean, life-giving water. So, you do what any Roman in your position would do. You head for the nearest public fountain. Because in ancient Rome, you don't simply turn a faucet and receive crisp, cool hydration. You are utterly dependent on a sprawling, complex, and dangerously vulnerable infrastructure of aqueducts, cisterns, and communal outlets. And if any single part of that system fails, so do you. Rome's aqueducts were, without question, a marvel of engineering. By the 1st century CE, the city was serviced by 11 massive aqueducts, some stretching over 50 miles to tap into distant mountain springs. These architectural wonders brought an estimated 200 million gallons of water into the city every single day, enough to supply the grand public baths, the ornate fountains, the flushing latrines of the elite, and the private homes of the wealthy. But here is the catch. Only the rich had indoor plumbing. For the rest of the population, which means you, getting water means lining up at one of the hundreds of public fountains scattered throughout the city's neighborhoods, clay jug in hand, praying there's still enough pressure in the system to provide a trickle. Now, the good news is that the water, when it arrives, is often sourced from clean springs, and the aqueducts are designed with a constant, gentle downward slope to keep it flowing. The bad news is that clean is a highly relative term. If you live near the end of the line in the poorer districts, you're likely getting the system's backwash water that has already passed through several baths, industrial workshops, and elite toilets upstream. Add to that the occasional bit of sabotage from a rival neighborhood, illegal tapping of the pipes, or just natural sediment buildup, and you're not exactly sipping spring water. It's more like a tepid, mineral-heavy soup with a subtle hint of lead. Because yes, a great many of the pipes are made of lead. The Romans didn't understand the long-term neurological effects, but if your thoughts start feeling a bit fuzzy and your coordination is off, don't blame the gods. Blame the plumbing. And if you think that's bad, just wait until nature calls again. As you know, most Romans did not have private toilets. Apartment dwellers like you, living in your top-floor insula, relied on pots, buckets, or chamber pots. When full, the contents were unceremoniously dumped out the window or into the nearest open gutter. The famed Roman sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, was another engineering marvel, but its main channels ran through the city's center, a subterranean lifeline for the wealthy. Most of your waste never made it that far. It sat in the street, baking in the sun, mixing with animal droppings and rotting garbage, slowly forming a biological miasma so potent it could probably peel the paint from a fresco. Now you understand why shoes are so important in Rome. You're not just walking on stones. You're walking on yesterday's dinner in its final, fragrant form. There are public latrines, of course, and if you're lucky or desperate enough, you can pay a small fee to use one. These are long, communal stone benches with a series of holes carved in them, all positioned over a channel of constantly flowing water. There are no partitions, no doors, just a long row of strangers making awkward eye contact while trying to pretend nothing unusual is happening. You sit shoulder to shoulder with a retired centurion and a 12-year-old olive vendor, all contributing to the same steady stream of civic solidarity. The Romans believed in shared experiences. This was certainly one of them. And toilet paper? Not a thing. Instead, you use a tersorium, a communal sponge on a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar water. It is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. You pray the man before you had good hygiene. He didn't. Nobody does. You wipe, you rinse the sponge, you put it back, and you move on with your life. You probably head straight for the nearest bathhouse, which, thankfully, is where things get slightly better. And significantly weirder. The Roman bathhouse is part spa, part gym, part social network, and part large-scale biological experiment. By the height of the empire, there were over 800 public bath complexes in Rome, from grand, imperial thermae like the baths of Caracalla, to modest neighborhood baths tucked between bakeries and brothels. Entry is cheap, usually just a quadrans, the smallest Roman coin, making it accessible to almost everyone. But just because you can get in doesn't mean you belong. The social hierarchy follows you right through the door. The bathing process follows a strict ritual. First, you enter the apodyterium or changing room. There are no private lockers. If you don't have a slave to guard your tunic and sandals, they might just walk off without you. Next, you might head to the palestra, the exercise yard, to work up a sweat. You'll see men wrestling, lifting heavy stone weights, or boxing with metal-studded gloves called cestus. You, however, are already sore from hauling amphory all morning, so you skip the workout and head straight for the main event. You move through a sequence of rooms, from the tepidarium, warm room, to the blistering caldarium, hot room. A space so thick with steam it feels designed to make you wish for a quick death. Here, you don't use soap. Instead, you coat your skin in olive oil. Then, you or a friend scrapes it all off with a curved metal tool called a strigil, removing the oil along with dirt, sweat, and several layers of your dignity. Beneath the mosaic floors, fires rage in the hypocaust system, tended by slaves in suffocating, windowless rooms. Their suffering makes the marble hot to your touch. That is the price of Roman cleanliness. And the water? It is changed only occasionally. Filtration is a concept centuries in the future. You are, in effect, bathing in a warm, microbial soup of humanity, stirred hourly by the movement of hundreds of unwashed bodies. Skin infections, eye diseases, intestinal worms, everything is on the menu. If someone gets a nosebleed from the heat, that's just another ingredient in the communal brew. And yet, this is one of the cleanest places in all of Rome. The bathhouse is also a civic ritual, the nerve center of the city. This is where news spreads, where gossip is traded, where business deals are struck. For a few moments, you share the same steam as men who rule entire provinces. But there is danger here, too. The humid air is a perfect breeding ground for illness. The stone benches are slick with something unidentifiable. A misstep could send you slipping face first into a pool of strangers. After you've scraped yourself clean, you might take a final plunge into the frigidarium, cold pool, to close your pores. Then you dry off with a scrap of wool and return to your street clothes, hoping they're still there. You step back outside, blinking in the harsh sunlight. You feel clean, sort of, but within 5 minutes, you're sweating again. The dust of the street clings to your damp ankles. A child vomits near your foot. The bath was never meant to last. It was a pause. It was a brief, semi-clean respite before stepping back into the furnace of Roman life. Finally, after hours of back-breaking labor, social humiliation, and a mild case of sunstroke, you have made your way home. You ascend the stairs of your insula carefully, deliberately, because the staircase is made of splintered wood and shame. One single misstep, one rotten plank giving way, and you could join the restless spirits of the fifth-floor tenants who took the fast way down last week. You reach your door. You enter. It's dark, it's cramped, and it smells faintly of boiling cabbage, even though you don't own any cabbage. Someone is already asleep in your designated corner. You don't ask who they are. You just lie down next to them, close your eyes, and pray you don't dream about the overflowing waste bucket. But now, having survived the market, the street toilets, and the general chaos of the city, comes the final and perhaps greatest challenge of your day. Simply existing inside the creaking, overcrowded, highly flammable tinderbox you are forced to call home. You live in an insula not because you chose it, but because you are poor. And in ancient Rome, the poor do not have houses. They have layers. You are stacked, one on top of the other, in multi-story apartment buildings packed so tightly together that sunlight becomes more of a rumor than a daily reality. Your particular insula is 6, maybe 7 stories tall. An illegal height, technically, but so is half the city, and bribes are as Roman as togas. It's constructed from a hopeful mixture of wood, clay bricks, and pure wishful thinking, leaning just slightly to one side as if it's perpetually preparing to collapse out of sheer exhaustion. You climb the stairs slowly, carefully, not only because you're tired, but because the entire building sways ominously whenever someone on the second floor sneezes. The higher you ascend, the worse it gets. Wealthier residents, if they can be called that, occupy the lower floors, enjoying better ventilation, easier access to the street, and a significantly lower probability of dying in a fire or fall. You, on the other hand, are up near the roof where the air is thin, the ceilings are low enough to give you a permanent stoop, and the rats have established their own thriving local economy. There are no private rooms here, no insulation, and most certainly no plumbing. There is just a single drafty room shared with your family, your neighbors, and any opportunistic creatures that manage to wander in through the numerous cracks in the walls. The walls themselves are made of cheap mud brick, and your door doesn't quite close. But hey, you've hung a piece of cloth over the opening. Luxury. And what about fire safety, you ask? That is an excellent and terrifying question. Fire is your most constant and faithful threat. Every home needs fire for cooking, for light, for warmth in the winter. But in your insula, there are no chimneys, no proper ventilation, and absolutely no fire code. Open flames flicker from countless oil lamps and cooking braziers, mere inches away from the dry wooden beams that hold the whole precarious structure together. One errant spark, one strong gust of wind through a broken window, and the entire block could be reduced to a heap of smoking ash within the hour. Firefighters, known as the vigiles, do exist technically. In 24 CE, the Emperor Augustus formed this brigade to stop Rome from burning down every other Tuesday. But they are mostly slaves, underpaid, overworked, and famously corrupt. If a fire starts in your building, they are more likely to stand by and watch it burn, demanding a bribe from the desperate residents to intervene. If you can't pay, they will simply let it burn to the ground and then confiscate whatever salvageable materials are left. They call it enforcement. You call it robbery with extra steps. So you live in a state of constant low-grade fear of smoke. Every night before you fall into an uneasy sleep, you sniff the air, wondering if that scent is your neighbor's meager dinner or the beginning of the end. Your few belongings are always mentally packed for a quick escape. A blanket, a bowl, perhaps a small idol of the household gods, who you sincerely hope also accept bribes. And then there is the noise. Rome is never quiet. Wheeled carts are banned from the streets during the day to ease congestion, which means they all roll through at night. The iron-rimmed wheels grind against the cobblestones like thunder. Vendors shout their final sales pitches. Drunks sing off-key. Lovers argue. Dogs bark. And somewhere, someone is always playing a flute badly. Privacy is a fantasy you can't afford. Your neighbors hear everything. Your arguments, your snoring, your every cough and gastrointestinal tragedy. And in return, you are an unwilling audience to all of theirs. But perhaps it's better than being alone, because loneliness is not a common ailment here. Your insula is crowded beyond reason. Dozens of families are crammed into units smaller than a modern bathroom. Children are crying, adults are arguing, and old folks are muttering prayers in dark corners. Sometimes, people with no home at all will simply rent a corner of a room, paying a few coins to sleep sitting upright against a wall like a human coat rack. When it rains, your roof leaks. When it's not raining, it still somehow leaks. Water trickles down the inside of the walls, pooling on the floor, feeding the colonies of black mold that grow behind your sleeping mat. The floorboards creak and groan under your feet. The walls visibly shift in a strong wind. You develop the uncanny, life-saving skill of waking up just seconds before the staircase gives way beneath a heavy-footed neighbor. It is not a matter of if the building will fall apart. It is a matter of when. And if all that weren't enough, there are the pests. Rome's rodent population easily rivals its human one. Mice and rats scamper through your pantry, if you have one, leaving little black gifts behind. Flies buzz in thick, lazy clouds around any morsel of food. Mosquitoes breed in the stagnant puddles in the alleyways. And then there are the bed bugs. You scratch yourself raw in your sleep and have vivid nightmares about itching. But despite all of this, you survive. You learn to navigate the collapsing staircases like a seasoned acrobat. You learn to hang your wet laundry on lines that sway over the alley, praying it dries before it's stolen. You haul fresh water up 6 flights of stairs and carry fetid waste down, always careful not to slip in someone else's garbage or your own. Still, the insula is not your sanctuary. It is a holding pen, a temporary space between one disaster and the next. Fires, floods, famine, and violence have all passed through this building like regular, unwelcome guests. And yet it stands, just barely. There are moments, strange and fleeting, of community. A neighbor wordlessly offers you a piece of their stale bread. A child tugs on your tunic to proudly show you a dead bird they found. The woman across the hall hums a tune while stirring her pot of lentils. You might even smile just for a second, because you realize you all live in the same cage, facing the same storms together. Rome is massive, home to over 1 million people, and its rich live in marble palaces with mosaic floors and private baths. But you know of their lives only through rumor. For you, the insula is everything: your bed, your shelter, your prison. And if it collapses tomorrow, and it just might, no one of official importance will mourn its passing. The rubble will be cleared away, and a new insula will rise in its place, built faster, cheaper, and even more dangerously than the last. The cycle continues, and you, if you're lucky, will rent a corner in that new box and begin the struggle all over again. Because in ancient Rome, the poor do not rest. They adapt. They huddle together in the dark, dodging falling embers and shouted curses, hoping that the next collapse doesn't start with them. Religion in ancient Rome is not something you do once a week. It's not a quiet, personal affair whispered in pews or practiced behind the closed doors of your home. In Rome, religion is everywhere, all the time. It is baked into the very bricks of the forum. It's painted on the crumbling walls of your insula, and it's written into the fundamental schedule of your day. You don't choose to participate in it. You live inside it, and it watches you with the same unblinking vigilance as the state, because in many ways, it is the state. Your day begins and ends with the gods. Before you even step out of your cramped apartment, you mutter a quick, half-hearted offering to the household spirits, the Laras and Penates. These are the ancient, invisible guardians of your hearth and your pantry. The divine figures you hope will ensure your home doesn't completely fall apart. This morning, there's no food left to burn for them, no splash of wine to offer. There is only a single crumb of dried bread and a tired, perfunctory gesture of thanks. But it's the thought that counts, or so you hope. You know the stories passed down from your grandmother. Neglect the household gods, and your family could suffer illness, injury, or just a string of relentless misfortune. It doesn't matter if you truly believe it with all your heart. Enough bad luck strung together starts to feel an awful lot like divine punishment. And soon enough, you'll find yourself scrubbing the floor with extra vigor and lighting a precious stick of incense just to try and win back their favor. Outside, the street is already alive with the sounds of commerce, but it's also alive with the presence of the divine. Smoke rises in lazy, greasy curls from tiny shrines nestled into the corners of buildings. These aren't merely decorative. They are active altars, small open-faced boxes holding flickering oil lamps, the charred remains of burnt offerings, and the thick, heavy scent of sacrificed animal fat. You pass them on your way to find work. Maybe you bow your head slightly, maybe you don't, but someone always notices. In Rome, piety is a form of social currency. Fail to observe the proper rites, and your neighbors won't just talk. They might accuse. The Roman pantheon is a crowded and dysfunctional family. Jupiter, the king, rules the skies with thunderbolts and a fragile ego. His wife, Juno, watches over marriage, whether it's a happy union or a miserable one. Mars is the god of war and aggressive masculinity. And Vesta, the virgin goddess, keeps the sacred flame of Rome perpetually burning. A job so critical that her priestesses, the Vestal virgins, are chosen as children and are punished by being buried alive if they ever break their vows of chastity. This is the world you inhabit, a world where virginity, fire, and the political stability of an empire are all bound together in a single, sacred thread. Religion here isn't optional. It's calendared. The state mandates over 100 official festival days a year. There's the Lupercalia, where half-naked men run through the streets, playfully whipping women with goat-hide thongs in the name of fertility. There's the Saturnalia, a wild, week-long festival where slaves and masters switch roles in an upside-down mockery of social order. And then there are countless others. Festivals for crops, for harvests, for rain, for the sun, and even for mildew. Yes, mildew, because in Rome, every force of nature has a name, a personality, a temple, and a priest demanding tribute. As a poor plebeian, you cannot afford to sacrifice a bull at the temple. But the elite can, and they make sure you know it. Wealthy patrons slaughter expensive animals, their fine robes splashed with blood, as incense billows in thick, perfumed clouds. You stand at the back of the crowd, clutching a small, crudely made votive figurine, hoping the gods can hear your desperate prayers from that far away. The ritual language is often Old Latin, barely understandable even to the priests reciting it. But the spectacle, the theater of it all, is crystal clear. Religion is a performance, and you are merely an audience member. Of course, not everyone thinks alike. By the 1st century CE, the Roman world is a melting pot of beliefs. Foreign cults have seeped into the cracks of the empire. You might hear whispers of a mysterious Eastern goddess named Isis, whose followers dress in white linen and chant in candlelit, secret rooms. Or you might hear of a strange sun god from Persia named Mithras, whose rites involve clandestine underground gatherings and symbolic meals of bread and wine. These religions are sometimes tolerated, sometimes outlawed, and always watched with deep suspicion. The Roman state values order above all else. Anything that smells of secrecy or, worse, disloyalty to the state gods is deemed dangerous. This is precisely why, when a new sect called Christianity begins to spread, it doesn't just make the authorities nervous. It enrages them. A religion with no statues, a god with no face, a group of people who refuse to offer sacrifice to Jupiter or to the emperor himself. That isn't just impiety. In the eyes of Rome, that is treason. But you, in this moment, probably don't think much about Christianity. It's still a strange, foreign cult on the fringes. Your life is ruled by the gods of your ancestors, the expectations of your community, and the sheer, crushing momentum of tradition. Superstition is the second skin of your daily life. You avoid walking under a ladder, not because it's physically unsafe, but because it invites bad luck. A black dog seen at night is an omen of death. If someone sneezes, you immediately say salve, be well, not out of politeness, but to protect their soul from escaping their body. You know the signs. A bird flying to your left? Bad news. Thunder after dusk? Don't travel tomorrow. Dreams are messages to be interpreted. The entrails of sacrificed animals are roadmaps to the future. Omens are everywhere. And it's not just the living you have to worry about. The dead don't always stay quiet. Each year, during the festival of Lemuria, you must perform rites to keep the restless spirits, the lemurs, from haunting your home. You rise at midnight, and while barefoot, you toss black beans over your shoulder 9 times, chanting ancient words to satisfy the hungry shades. If you forget or perform the ritual incorrectly, don't be surprised if objects go missing or if the air in your room turns sour in the dead of night. To a modern observer, all of this might seem quaint or irrational, but to you, it's a matter of life and death. Without antibiotics, germ theory, or modern psychology, you turn to the gods for an explanation for the unexplainable. Why did the fire start? Why did your baby die in the night? Why did the grain spoil in its pot? The answer is always the same. The gods are fickle. You didn't perform the right sacrifice. You forgot an offering. You used the wrong words. Someone in your building insulted Mercury, and now everyone must pay the price. And yet, for all its terror, religion gives your life meaning. It provides a structure, a rhythm, a way to understand the chaos. When your child is born, you present it to the genius of the family. When you marry, you light a ceremonial torch and bind your hands with sacred ribbons. When someone you love dies, you mourn for the prescribed number of days. You burn their meager possessions, and you whisper their name until your throat is raw. In Rome, to be remembered is to stay alive. The true death is to be forgotten. And so you keep praying, offering, and watching, not because the gods are kind, but because they are powerful. Not because the rituals are easy, but because they are necessary. You live in a city where divine favor and political favor are nearly the same thing, where neglecting a festival could be blamed for the next earthquake. The day winds down. You pass another small shrine, this one dedicated to Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings and endings. You stop. You bow your head. You whisper a few words you barely understand, because in this city, the gods are everywhere. And in ancient Rome, the very last thing you ever want to do is be noticed by one of them. The sun is low on the horizon now, casting long, distorted shadows across the uneven cobbled streets of Rome. The familiar smells of the city, sewage, olive oil, wood smoke, and sweat, cling heavier in the cooling evening air. But you don't have time to notice the melancholic beauty of the sunset. You are about to learn what it means to live in a world where justice isn't blind. It just chooses not to see people like you. As a plebeian, a freedman, or worse, a slave, you exist at the absolute bottom of the Roman legal ladder. The law is not some abstract, noble ideal here. It is a very real and very practical tool of control, written by the elite to protect their property, preserve the rigid social hierarchy, and make terrifying examples out of the lower classes. Forget the notion of equal rights. Justice in ancient Rome is a transaction, and if you lack the currency of wealth or powerful connections, the law is less a shield and more a weapon pointed squarely at your neck. Let's imagine a scenario. Someone accuses you of theft. Maybe a fellow vendor at the market claims you shortchanged him. Maybe a neighbor thinks you stole a loaf of bread, or someone's sandals went missing and your name was casually mentioned. That is all it takes. You are hauled in for questioning, and the burden of proof doesn't fall on your accuser. It falls entirely on you. And in many cases, especially if you are a slave, it doesn't even matter whether you're guilty or not. The only relevant question is how much pain it will take to extract a confession. Torture is not only legal in ancient Rome, it is an expected and routine part of any official investigation involving the enslaved. The grim logic goes like this: a slave, being property, possesses no honor. Therefore, a slave cannot be trusted to tell the truth without extreme persuasion. That persuasion comes in the form of whips, red-hot branding irons, and stretching racks. You can be interrogated and tortured simply for being in the vicinity of a crime. In fact, if your master is murdered, it is standard procedure for all the slaves in the household to be systematically tortured and executed, regardless of their guilt, just to ensure the true culprit is among the dead. Even if you are a free citizen, your options are not much better unless you are wealthy. Legal representation exists in the form of advocati, but these lawyers are not paid in fees. They work for favors, for social advancement, or because they are using the case to gain political attention. If your case is brought before a magistrate, you had better pray your opponent isn't rich. Bribery is commonplace and often expected. Trials can be delayed indefinitely, and the judges are almost always members of the same elite class as the people accusing you. In a Roman court, your connections matter far more than the evidence. Punishments are public, brutal, and meticulously designed to humiliate, but they scale dramatically with your social status. If a patrician commits a serious crime, he might be quietly allowed to go into voluntary exile, often keeping his wealth and titles intact. If a plebeian commits the very same crime, the sentence is chains, public flogging, or worse. Methods of execution vary. Beheading is considered a relatively merciful and honorable death, a swift end reserved almost exclusively for Roman citizens. If you are not a citizen, or if you are a slave, crucifixion is far more likely. It is an agonizing, drawn-out, and deeply public death, reserved for slaves, rebels, and the lowest class of criminals. You would be stripped, whipped until the flesh was flayed from your back, nailed to a wooden cross, and left to die slowly in the open air, a spectacle for all to see. The birds would arrive long before you were even gone. For the Romans, this was not just a punishment. It was the final, degrading performance of your life. But not every crime leads to your death. Petty theft might earn you a severe beating or a branding on your forehead, marking you for life. You could be tied to a post in the forum and scourged for the entertainment of passersby. Repeat offenses could get you sold into slavery, even if you were born a free man. The Roman legal system has no concept of rehabilitation. You are either useful to the state or you are disposable. Now, imagine you've fallen into debt. Maybe a bad harvest forced you to borrow grain from a wealthy landowner. Maybe your child fell ill and you needed money for a so-called physician. Debt in ancient Rome is a dangerous trap. If you cannot pay it back, your creditor has the legal right to seize your property or, more terrifyingly, your body. You can be imprisoned, sold as a bondservant, or forced into labor until the debt is paid off, a cycle from which few ever escape. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Roman law is how deeply it is intertwined with spectacle and entertainment. The public games, the executions, and military triumphs all blur the line between civic order and blood sport. Criminals sentenced to die might literally be thrown to the wild beasts in the amphitheater. This is not a metaphor. This is a Tuesday afternoon's entertainment. A prisoner convicted of treason or arson could be chained, released into the sands of the Colosseum, and be mauled to death by lions, leopards, or bears, all to the roaring delight of thousands of spectators. The logic is both pragmatic and profoundly cruel. These executions serve as visceral warnings to the populace, reminding everyone of who holds the power. And if they happen to distract the public from grain shortages or political scandals, all the better. For women, the law offers even less protection. Under the ancient rule of patria potestas, a father had absolute power over his household, including the right to disown or even execute his own child. A husband could legally kill his wife if he caught her in the act of adultery. Domestic abuse wasn't a crime. It was a private family matter. In theory, a woman could seek legal recourse, but in practice, she was silenced by layers of custom, intimidation, and institutional indifference. The irony is that Rome saw itself as the pinnacle of civilization, and in many ways it was. It had an advanced legal code, a system of courts, and procedures for appeals written into stone like the famed 12 Tables. But those laws and reforms rarely reach down to your level. You are a peasant, a tradesman, a former slave, a woman without a dowry, a child without a father. In Rome, justice may wear a toga, but she walks with a blade, and she does not look down. So what do? You do what everyone in your position does. You try to stay invisible. You keep your head down, you avoid conflict, you pay your dues, and you pray to the gods that your name is never spoken in a whisper that matters. Because here, in the shadow of the Palatine Hill, justice is not about what is fair. It is about who holds the power and how willing they are to use it. Tonight, you will sleep lightly because in ancient Rome, justice may come for you at any time, and it rarely knocks twice. By now, you've endured sewage in your stew, you've slept under lice-infested wool, and you've labored under a sun that cooks clay. You have chafed, you have bled, and you have aged 2 decades in a single brutal day. But even in ancient Rome, all roads, whether paved with marble or filth, eventually lead to the same destination: death. And for you, a poor plebeian with no name worth carving into stone, your journey is destined to end without honor, without ceremony, and without even the certainty of being remembered. Let's not sugarcoat this. In the world you now inhabit, death comes early, and it comes often. For the Roman poor, life was not a candle gently extinguished by a soft breeze. It was a cheap torch that flared violently, sputtered, and was abruptly snuffed out by accident, infection, starvation, or violence. You didn't so much pass away as you fell apart. The average life expectancy in Rome hovered somewhere between 25 and 30 years old. That number is skewed by the horrifying infant mortality rate. Nearly 1 in 3 babies didn't survive to see their first birthday. But even if you were tough enough to make it past childhood, you lived a hard life and you died a young death. A minor fever could spiral into sepsis. A broken bone could fester into gangrene. A simple cut, sustained in the filth of the slums, could lead to a slow, agonizing rot for which there was no cure. Penicillin is still 18 centuries in the future. Let's say you don't die violently. Let's pretend you simply waste away, as so many did. In that case, your final days are spent in your cramped tenement apartment, the air thick with the reek of the chamber pot, your breath wheezing through cracked lips. There are no hospitals, no nurses, no palliative care. If you're lucky, a relative might be there to hold your hand. But just as often, your body is discovered days later, stiff and still, the rats already showing a curious interest. So what happens next? If you were a slave, your property, your body, will be disposed of without any ceremony at all. You will be dumped into a puticuli, a massive, open-air pit outside the city walls. A mass grave filled with layers upon layers of anonymous corpses, all left to decay together under the sun. No headstone, no urn, no final prayer. Just the quiet, relentless churn of decomposition. These pits were Roman efficiency at its most callous. Hundreds of bodies tossed in, covered with lime to mask the stench, and then utterly forgotten. If you were a free but poor Roman, you might fare marginally better. Marginally. Your family, if they could afford it, might have paid dues to a burial club, a collegium. These clubs were the closest thing the working poor had to life insurance, pooling their meager resources to provide members with the absolute minimum: a proper cremation or burial and a modest ceremony. You might even get a small terracotta urn for your ashes, perhaps with your name crudely scratched onto it, if your family managed to scrape together enough coin. But if they couldn't, it was back to the pit for you. And what did the Romans believe came next? The afterlife, according to traditional Roman religion, was a murky, uninviting, and deeply underwhelming place called the underworld. It was neither paradise nor a realm of punishment. It was just a continuation of existence, only dimmer, grayer, and colder. The souls of the dead, the manes, were believed to wander restlessly for eternity unless they were properly appeased with offerings of food, drink, and ritual. The poor, of course, couldn't afford grand rites, which meant that many of their spirits were believed to linger as hungry, vengeful shades. The wealthy, naturally, had a different experience. They had grand tombs, imposing mausoleums, and intricately engraved sarcophagi. Their ashes were stored in beautiful marble urns inscribed with poetry. Their names would be spoken and remembered for generations. You, on the other hand, may have never had your full name officially recorded at all. And the worst part is that your death wasn't even safe from politics. If you were executed as a criminal, your body might be denied burial altogether. You could be crucified and left to rot as a public warning, your bones scattered by stray dogs. Or worse, you could be condemned to damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, where your name would be scratched off all records, your identity systematically erased from history. There is something uniquely cruel about dying twice. Once in the body and once in memory. Let's pause here for a moment. You have lived this entire day as a nobody in ancient Rome. You have eaten spoiled lentils, relieved yourself in a broken pot, fought rats for a place to sleep, and collapsed after hauling bricks or firewood or wet laundry in the relentless sun. And now, after all that, your death is quiet, unrecorded, and statistically expected. It would be easy to end this story right here, in the suffocating silence of a mass grave, buried beneath a mound of others just like you. But history isn't only about endings. Sometimes it's about perspective. So let's take a breath. Right now, you are most likely lying in a bed. A real one with blankets that are not alive. You probably have access to medicine, to clean water, to food that doesn't require a detailed risk assessment before consumption. You may have even brushed your teeth today. You are not fighting for survival, at least not in the ancient sense of the word. And yet, this Roman peasant you embodied today, the one scratching at lice, bartering for onions, and ducking the contents of chamber pots, they still matter, because they were real, not by name perhaps, but by the millions. Their backs built the aqueducts and the temples. Their voices echoed in the forums and the markets. Their bones paved the literal roads that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. They bore the immense weight of an empire silently and without inscription. History often forgets the poor. It remembers the emperors, the generals, the poets, and the philosophers. It gives us their marble busts and their bronze plaques. But underneath it all, there were men and women who never wrote a line of Latin, who never stood in the Senate, and who never saw their likeness chiseled in stone. And maybe that is the real reason this story was worth telling. Because for one night, for one quiet moment before you sleep, you lived their life. You felt the straw under their back, the cold breath of winter between cracked walls, the gnawing weight of hunger, and the sheer, absurd challenge of surviving in a world designed to break you. You didn't really last a day, but you came closer than most ever will. And when you wake up, maybe you'll carry a small piece of this with you. Not guilt and not pity, just perspective. The perspective that clean water is not a guarantee, that hot food is not a given, that your bed, your toothbrush, your medicine, your toilet, they are not minor luxuries. They are miracles, stacked one on top of the other, born from centuries of struggle, from millions of broken backs and forgotten lives. So, as the screen fades to black and the last words whisper into your ear, take a moment. Thank a peasant. They are the reason you are not one.